mute that time. All right, if you got your Bibles, go ahead and grab them, and I'm pretty sure you know where to turn. We're going to look at Matthew chapter, well, I don't know where to turn. Where are we at? 16. Chapter 16, verse 13. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and read right into it real quick here for you. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Phillippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They understood that, obviously, to mean he was talking about himself. "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets." All, people saying that he's John the Baptist obviously haven't been paying attention that Jesus and John the Baptist were both, there at the same time. Anyway, so he said to them, "But who do you say I am?" Well, Peter, being how Peter is, he spoke right up. He says, you're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. Now, we're going to come back to that in just a second, so hold your finger there. Jesus answered him and said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah," or son of Jonah, "for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. All right, I can keep on seeing this thing, and I feel like I'm going to brush it with my beard and give you all ear tickles. All right, so Caesarea Phillippi. So at one point in time, for a very short time, it was called Neronius, which was in honor of Nero. And of course, Caesarea Philippi, Caesar, Philip, where's Ito? I need him to be shaking his head or nodding his head or something. Oh, he's back there. Anyway, but it was changed to, when the Romans show up, it was called Panius, or the area of Pan, the place of Pan. And it was kind of shortened, almost not quite a nickname, but just maybe even a mispronunciation to the word Banias, or Banias. We saw it as we pulled in here. They still call it that, Banias. It's where we get the Spanish word baño. I'm just kidding. Anyway, Panias comes from the Greek word Pan. The god Pan also is responsible for the word panic. You guys heard that word before? I'm having a panic attack. It means to be in great fear of something you've heard or whatever. But it comes from the god Pan was supposed to, when he gets really angry, he has a really threatening and loud voice, and people got really scared of that. It was the idea. And when the Romans showed up in this area, there used to be this big torrential water outpouring in the rock there before it collapsed in an earthquake. But it was just this roar of sound that came out of there. And the Romans heard that and they're like, "Oh, well, clearly the god Pan comes from this area." We get the gates of hell from before the Roman period. Baal was worshipped here. And the worshippers believed that these were the gates of Hades here. So the gates of hell, we find that to be the reference there. All right, so I want to go back then. Let's look back at Matthew chapter 16. And I'd like to look at what Peter actually says and why this was such a neat thing to Jesus. Why does he react this way? There's only a couple places where Jesus says, "Yeah, you got it," in the Bible, where he says, "You understand something that nobody else understands." We know this Capernaum. We know about the centurion there and how he told Jesus, "No, you don't even have to come here because everything has to obey its creator. You are the God. You are the God. And you can heal this person from there." And Jesus says, "You got it." When they returned there, they found the person to be well. So this is one of those instances where Jesus talks to Peter and he says, "Peter, this is a blessing. This is something that is this is a gift to you from God." Blessing, by the way, connotates that it comes from God. It's not, "Oh, bless your heart, that's neat," or may this person who's passed be blessed or something like that. It connotates here especially that this is a gift that God specifically gave to you for this very specific instance, Peter. But Peter, look at what he says and why Jesus reacts to it this way. Peter says, "You are the Christ." That's no big deal. Not really, anyway. To them, to have the term the Messiah bestowed on them, Christ, Messiah, it's interchangeable almost. Jesus had been saying and doing things that were very messianic at this point, and Peter could have picked up on that really easy. But Peter doesn't stop there. He says, the Son of the living God. To attribute that Jesus is the Son of this God means that you have power from God. You are God. This is something that comes to you because you are... think about me and those who know my Father and those of you who know me, and how similar we are. Well, that's because people say I'm just the younger version of him, or we're twins separated by years. But that's kind of the same idea, that if you are the Son of God, you have to be God. There is no other thing. It's not like, well, God had a mortal son. Not in the Hebrew mind anyway. So when he says that, he's saying you are God. But there's one more word I want you to pay attention to in here, and that it's the word living. You are son of the living God. So the indicates singular God, and that's easy to see. The Hebrews already believe that. But that he says you are the son of the living God. And we can say amen to that. That's a pretty special thing. Okay, this is ridiculous, I know, and we don't need to go there, but I'm going to do it anyway. I was watching an old Star Trek episode a while ago, and these little electronic beings decided that they were, going to reproduce in the ship, and it was causing problems, and then all of a sudden they kind of gathered their own intelligence, and they evolved or whatever. And so Captain Jean-Luc Picard was having trouble getting rid of them, because if we clean the virus out of the ship, then it's killing a living being. And I'm like, oh my goodness, just wipe it with the virus, whatever. But either way, they were having trouble with doing this because it was against the rules, because they were living beings, because they reproduced and they had intelligent thought and blah, blah, blah. When Peter says that this is the living God, he correctly identifies that no other God is a living God. They are mythology. They have no evidence of ever doing anything. Sacrifices constantly to them. They have to, you have to construct their image. When we're talking about when Gideon knocked down the Baal altar and tore down the Asherah pole and burnt it in the oxen back in his story, and Gideon's father defended him by saying to the people who were angry at Gideon, Gideon's father said, well, if Baal's a god, let him contend with him. Let him take it up. Clearly he didn't do anything. Why? Because he's not a god. He's not alive. People worship him, but he's not alive. He's not real. Peter says you are the Son of the living God. This is the God of action. This is the God who does. This is the God who makes things happen. He is of substance. Now you can carve an image out of stone, and it's a stone image, but it can break and it can wear down. But God made the stone to begin with in the first place. God made the world, and Peter says this is the true and living God. Now when Jesus was here, we don't know for certain that he went into the city. We don't know for certain that he went over to here and was pointing at the temple to Pan. If you look up on the internet, it says there was no temples attributed to Pan. I don't know what this is then, if that's not a temple to Pan. That's ridiculous. So don't pay attention to the internet. It'll tell you all kinds of false things. But you have Jesus referring to this one way or the other when he is in this area. It says when he came into the area of Caesarea Philippi, the culture around here was rich with it. It wasn't just here that they worshiped, the worshipers would come to this area. When you think about the church that you attend, you don't live on the doorstep of the church, right? You come from the areas around and you go to church. Well, that's the same idea. People came from around the surrounding area, and they came and they did their worshipy things, and they threw the goat down in the swirling water, and if the blood came out, then it was a good or bad omen. I don't know how the ceremony went down. I don't worship Pan because he's not a living God. So we don't have to worry about that too much. But the God that is the God that has substance, even calls himself I am. And I like that name for God. It's one of my favorite names for God, because he is. There is no other God that can claim that. Mostly because they're not there, so they can't claim it, right? All right. But our God says he is, and he is the only one. That is what Peter says. Jesus, you are the only God. And I know this. That's kind of a big thing. It wasn't something that was really calculated when he said it. Not even sure how he comes about it, except that Jesus says, this was revealed to you. So Peter really gets it. Then Jesus goes on, he says, blessed are you. This is a favor, this is a gift given by God. You could not understand this as a human. And then he points out, you are the son of you are Simon, the son of Jonah. That's Peter's given name, Simon. And Simon means to listen, which is interesting because a lot of the instances where we have Peter in the Bible, we often find him not listening. But where Peter then he has this nickname that he goes by. It's kind of like saying Rocky or something. Peter means rock. And of course we look at this here, and we see that Jesus doesn't just he doesn't nickname him here, but there's only a couple instances in the Bible where somebody gets a new name. This is the only instance that I am aware of where they are given the same name as their name. So Peter goes from being Simon Peter, Peter, that Simon, elbow him in the ribs, Rocky, he's the stout one, right? We've got other instances referring to Peter's physical attributes of maybe not being quite so long of the legs, slower than the other disciple to get to the tomb. But he doesn't stop much. When Peter's got something in his head, he's got to follow through with it. So he just runs right down into the tomb later. But so his nickname is Rocky. He's stout, perhaps even. If we want to give him physical attributes to that. But Jesus says, "And I tell you." And by the way, when people are telling you something in the South, they'll say, "Well, let me tell you." And it's an emphasis on what they're going to tell you. You better listen. So it's kind of interesting. Peter's name, Simon. Listen. I'm going to tell you something. You really are Peter. You really do fit this definition of your name. Why does he fit the definition of this name? Is it because he's stout? Jesus is like, you really are a rock solid guy there, Peter. That's pretty cool. No, he's not ribbing him. He's saying, there's something about what you said that is of substance. Peter says, we follow this God of substance, not this God. We follow this God that is big, that is the only one, that is the Creator. He is of substance. He is alive. And Jesus says, you have substance, Peter. That is a solid thing. You are Peter. That's a funny thing to tell somebody, that your nickname is befitting, but for an entirely different reason. And then he goes on. He says, you are Peter, you are of substance. And then Jesus says, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Jesus says, on that substance, Peter, that I just called you of this substance, that substance I will build my church on. That is the foundation, if you will, of my church. Now we talked about foundations before, right? House that's built on sand, house that's built on a rock, it stays there. Even if the house falls down, you still have the foundation. You still have something to build on, and it's always evidence of it being there. Correct? Jesus is telling Peter, that is a solid thing, Peter. Hold on to that. And this church, this gathering of people, is going to be built on that same thing. Without it, you don't have it. Without that foundation, there's nothing to build upon. What is that foundation? This God is a God of substance. This God is a God of solution. He is the creator God. Okay. So, I'd like you to look at some other things here. This city was destroyed by an earthquake. It was over an 8-something earthquake, I believe. You can tell by, like Ito said before, how far the stones flew. They were able to calculate by the weight of the stone how far it flew, and you can see just how big the movement had to be for it to happen. So you can then calculate back, well, that's an 8 point, whatever it is. I don't know. I wasn't listening last time when Ito told me, and he could probably tell you again sometime if you ask him, but you have that city that was over there and it's collapsed. And you can go over there and look at the stones and these big pillars that are just smashed all over the place. But then you have this big rock face over here that you're going to get to look at. And that didn't fall in the quake. Why didn't that fall in the quake? Anybody? Why wouldn't a big rock fall in the quake? The earthquake? Because what?
The foundation.
Because the foundation? It's because it is the foundation, isn't it? I mean, they carved it out of the rock, the temple. You know, the rest of the temple fell apart, and all the things that man has added to it. Keep in mind, everything that man has added to it fell apart, right? But what was already there stayed firm. Now, I'm not saying that you know, the temple to Pan is a really solid thing, whatever. You can see over time it's worn out, and it even has collapsed within itself over the last 2,000 years. But when you have a God, the God, who does not collapse, who is a foundation, it doesn't matter what you add around it, the things that you do can collapse. Then you have to keep on going back to that foundation. I know I'm getting redundant here, but please bear with me. All right, so even this rock with its false god will not outlast the foundation that you have, is what Jesus was saying when he says, and the gates of hell will not prevail. This will eventually wear down. The earth will eventually go away. The real gates of hell, they want to destroy. They want to make you weak. They want to get rid of any opportunity that you have a chance to minister. That's really why we're still here on this earth, is to be able to reach out to others who do not know of this foundation, right? But they will not be able to stop or destroy this foundation. That house built on a firm foundation will stand, right? So there's other things that I want you to pay attention to. Quick turn in your Bibles to Luke 19. Chapter 19, verse 40. This is in the triumphal entry here. Jesus is headed into Jerusalem, and the Pharisees are having a cow. They do not like to see him being praised. They do not like to see him being praised. So some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." And he says, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." Keeping in mind, he didn't say rocks. The word stones implies that it's cut, has a purposeful use. The very stones would cry out. What is this stones? In that instance, was he talking physically of those exact, actual rocks? I don't know. Quite possibly. If you could shut every Christian, somebody who's giving the Word of God up, it can't be stopped. It's, again, that foundation that cannot